The latest now on the move towards Holyoke Public Schools regaining total independence after years of being under state control.
The State Board of Elementary and Secondary Education got an important update at their meeting this morning. Western Mass News reporter Reagan Logri has more.
For nearly a decade, Holyoke Public Schools has been under state oversight with a receivership in place due to low student test scores and graduation rates. However, back in March, Western Mass News learned the school district is finally on the path to resume a local control. And on Tuesday, the acting Department of Elementary and Secondary Education Commissioner provided an update on how that transition is going so far.
We're meeting with the local control subcommittee of the school committee, and we continue to have meetings with that subcommittee on the development of a plan to transition out of receivership.
Acting Commissioner Russell Johnson telling DESE board members that his recent work with the Holyoke School Committee has been productive.
I participated in a third meeting with the subcommittee in which we discussed the role of the school committee in the budget process. And I'm so pleased to tell you, they came incredibly prepared.
Acting Commissioner Johnson goes on to rave about the efforts so far in the city of Holyoke as they work to break free of the state's control of their school system.
They know their stuff. They know what they are working to do, and their efforts to collaborate with the receiver, Anthony Soto, were very evident. And so I've just remained incredibly encouraged by the school committee's commitment to this process and their preparation for these meetings, as well as the work ahead.
There will be at least 4 more meetings with the DESE Commissioner and the Holyoke School Committee to finalize the exit plan, which is expected to be completed in August. We will continue to follow this story closely and provide updates as we receive them. Reporting in studio, Reagan Lockery for Western Mass News.